All right, welcome to Chapter 6. So today we're going to talk about some of the highlights from the chapter. A couple of your questions on your Chapter 6 study guide we will answer in this video if you want to pause and have that open. And then it'll kind of set the foundation as you dig deeper and read through the material in Chapter 6. So really Chapter 6 is focused on all the different ways that today's classrooms are diverse. What research in educational psychology tells us educators about those diverse classrooms, and then actual real strategies that we should use and things we should consider as we enter a diverse classroom and work to teach every student. So aspects affecting diversity that also affect teaching and learning. So these are just kind of the demographic subgroups. So we have social class. So we have classrooms with a lot of diversity in social class, which we're going to talk more what that means, but you probably have a good foundation of that already. We're going to talk about how diversity, having classes that are very diverse in race, ethnicity, gender, and sexual orientation affect how we teach and affect how our students learn, both individually as learners and also as our classrooms, our cultures of learners that we have grouped together in front of us. So let's make sure we understand what we're talking about when we use the word culture. So a broad definition of culture is knowledge, language, values, attitudes, traditions that shape and guide the behavior and beliefs of a group of people. So that's a lot, right? So basically, every part of a person that helps shape their group membership and how that group behaves and believes. And so you can probably imagine when you think of culture, it can be defined along regional lines. If you think of the dialect quiz and discussion board you did, those dialects are very regional, and a lot of the way we speak language is directly tied to our personal culture, again, tied to our region. We can also define culture along lines of ethnicity, religious groups, racial groups, gender groups, social class, and other lines. So individuals are members of many groups. So we're influenced by many cultures at the same time. So nobody has a single thing that determines their culture. Each of us is a conglomeration of many different cultures that mixes into each of us. So for me, I personally am Scottish and German. But I've been with my husband for 25 years, who is Creek and Choctaw. So I've been very welcomed into that culture. We have children of that culture too. So I kind of toe the line there. I'm also influenced by a culture of educators. I mentioned both my parents are teachers, my mother-in-law, my brother's a minister, which is a different type of educator. I work with teachers, I work with educators. So I would say that is an incredibly important part of my culture. And then I put this one there, it's kind of silly, but down at the bottom it just says travel ball mom. I think my head's blocking out the mom. But a ton of what goes into who I am is the 18 years I've spent between my three children, following them around as they play travel baseball and softball. So that really is an important part of my culture. Those groups I'm in with the different parents, the way we interact with each other is really important to who I am. So the textbook is going to get into the iceberg analogy for culture, and this is one of the two questions on your study guide. So if you think of an iceberg, and let's go back and reread this definition of culture. So culture is knowledge, language, values, attitudes, traditions that shape and guide behavior, beliefs of a group of people. Well, really, we could sort those attributes, knowledge, language, values, attitudes, and so on, into kind of, using the iceberg analogy, the tip of the iceberg, which is what we can see. It's above the water. These are things like language, clothing, food. So these are visible things, behaviors. If you came to my house, I don't know, in a month and a half, and there is a gigantic conglomerate of Christmas, decorations, you could see and probably infer that my family is Christian, that we celebrate Christmas. If you come to my family at the end of November, My husband and his family do not celebrate a traditional Thanksgiving. We celebrate harvest, for reasons you might be able to infer. But so there are things visible. If you walk into my house, you interact with me, or each person that we come in contact, that we can see pieces of their culture that are above the surface. But hidden below the surface, we have things like our values and beliefs. You can't look at me and know what my belief system is or what my values are. How do I think? How do I process things? Am I logical? Am I creative? How do I view the world politically, socially? What are my beliefs on gender roles? Those parts of my culture are below the surface. So anything that's a deeper aspect that drives visible behaviors, that would be, in this analogy, those pieces of culture below the surface. And in life and in our classrooms, a lot of times it's those below the surface cultural ingredients that can cause issues between us and our students, and between the students and each other. Not the things that we can see, but those little cultural differences that you can't really observe, but they're there. Those can be sources of conflict. So true understanding of our students means looking below the surface elements. So we have to really get to know our students and ourselves to understand what our cultures are, where can we find common ground, and how might cultures have conflicts. So one of the questions on your study guide does ask you to list 4 of your above the surface visible cultural aspects. So just make sure if there's something you're not comfortable writing down, you don't have to write it down. And then 4 below the surface cultural aspects for yourself. So if I was going to talk about myself, I was going to list 4 above the surface things that go into my culture. It could definitely be something about food. Food is a cultural experience in my family, whether it's I'm making I'm not a scrapbooker, but I do have a scrapbook of recipes, handwritten recipes handed down by my grandparents. So Scottish food, German food, things that we love to cook and eat together. Those are things I would put as my above the surface. A couple of things I would put there. Below the surface, what is my concept of social awareness? Where do I fall on political issues? Those are some of my core values that would be below the surface. How do I see what is acceptable or unacceptable? In your textbook, there's a great chart on page 233 that gives some more examples. And the one that always makes me laugh is facial expressions, because my stepmother is Filipino. And the first time I met her, I could not figure out what she was doing. I thought she was being rude or making faces at me. And then my dad explained to me, you know, my stepmother and in the Philippines, they point a lot with their mouths. So she was trying to point by puckering up. And once I understood that, totally fine. But it was a funny moment in a awkward meeting your stepmom for the first time conversation. All right, so the chapter is all about interpreting cultural differences and then ways to make sure that we're capitalizing on the beautiful diversity of our classrooms. But there is a caution, and that is that children are complex. Like us adults are complex, our cultural makeups, but at least we understand them. Children are also complex, but almost all of research done in educational psychology on these cultural differences in children only focuses on one variable at a time. For example, there's tons of research about how does social class impact school achievement, behavior, but it doesn't really say, okay, how does social class and gender, how do we combine these two things? So we all have intersectionality, which is overlapping, intersecting social identities. And so every student is going to be unique. So we can't just say, oh, that student is Hispanic, and so I'm going to make these assumptions about their culture and how I should interact with that student based on that one factor. It's another caution that we have to really get to know our students, our school communities, our parents as much as we can, because the more we know about the culture of our schools as a whole and our individual students, the best that we can serve them as their teachers. So the book is also going to talk about how does our economic and social class impact learning, school, and how might it impact teaching. So I think the most important thing, and the reason I wanted to talk it over in the video, is that we hear the term in education a lot, SES, social economic status. It'll say they're from a high economic status, a low SES, and a lot of our education data is broken down by SES. And I think most people probably think that SES just means your income level. If your family makes a certain amount of money a year, it puts you in this socioeconomic status. That's not quite true. So the textbook does a great job of talking about specifically what goes into each socioeconomic status, each kind of, I guess, group. And so it's not just money, although it's on there, and there's a chart on page 237 that specifies, at least when the book was published in 2021, here's what constituted you income level as upper, middle, working, or lower class. However, it also does an excellent job of explaining that there's some power dynamics that go with each status grouping. Background, prestige, educational level, what type of healthcare do they have? So it's good to read through that and have a really strong understanding of that. When we're talking about SES of our students and we're breaking down data based on a student's SES, it's not just a dollar sign. It also talks about income, power, health coverage, political power, all those different types of characteristics. So another aspect when we think about our diverse classrooms, our diverse schools, and our diverse students is the reality of extreme poverty, including homelessness and highly mobile students. I'll never forget my first year teaching. The high school where I started at, we did porch visits every year. So that meant there was a Friday during teacher report week, so before school had started, where we were divided up into teams of 4, and each team of 4 got the names and addresses of 12 incoming freshmen. And on that Friday, every person at our school, teachers, administrators, custodians, people that worked in the lunchroom, we were all in those groups, and we would divide up and we would go welcome every incoming freshman and their family to the South High community. And I would say there's about 500 or 600 students in each grade, so about that many freshmen. I loved it. It was a great experience to go, and not everybody would be home or excited to talk to you, but it made a difference. We would go there and welcome them to high school. So one year, maybe it was my first year, we had an address, and we pulled up at the address using our Google Maps, and it was a campground. And this incoming freshman and his family, that was their full-time address, was at a campground. And so seeing it with my eyes and understanding, okay, when the student comes to school, they're going to have different needs, than someone that came from a different place. And it's not because the family didn't love the student or there was abuse or anything like that, but just the act of not having a home, of being mobile, meaning moving from time to time. I knew that would impact the student. And research in EdPsych tells us that that's true, that 44% of U.S. children live in a low-income family. 1.3 million students in our public schools are homeless. And the data shows that there's lower achievement, for school, lower graduation rates, lower achievement on standardized testing, lower grade averages in school, the longer child remains in poverty. So we know there's an achievement gap between privileged children and children who live in poverty. And so it's our responsibility to understand what that gap means and have strategies for addressing it effectively. And there'll be some of those covered in this chapter. So we also know that one of the most important things we as educators have to do for students who we know are coming to us from poverty is we cannot set for them low expectations. So one of the terms you're going to read is learned helplessness. So this is when teachers, I guess we would say, feel sorry for children who come from poverty. And so because they feel sorry for them, whether they mean to do it or not, sometimes they don't call on them in class. They set lower standards for them, so they don't expect them to make top scores. They accept poor work from them instead of pushing them. If another student turned into the same thing, telling them, you need to redo this, or we need to work together on this, just accepting it instead of pushing them. And so that's a lower quality educational experience for those students. We're telling them that they can't do it, and then they learn that from us. That's learned helplessness. And because of that, they view school as a dead end. So part of what we have to do as educators is not teach down to students because they come from tough home environments. We're supposed to bring them up, not teach them that, school is a dead end for them. All right, so why do students in poverty perform worse on student achievement, have lower graduation rates? This is where our educational psychology research comes in, really to give us some answers. And the research shows not that students perform worse who come from poverty because they don't have ability or they're not as smart. It's because they have all of these things kind of stacked against them. They do not have access to high quality preschool care, something that research shows us time and again benefits our students. They get high quality preschool, they do better in elementary school and beyond. Our data and our research also shows us that students who live in poverty read less, watch TV and their devices more, and they access books less. It also shows that there's a greater academic setbacks for summer breaks, whereas students maybe who do not come from poverty are doing summer camps or going to daycare in the summer where they're doing academic pursuits. That's not happening in a lot of families who live in poverty. Our research also shows us that students begin school 6 months behind in reading schools when they come from a family living in poverty. And they also our research shows that they perform lower because they are tracked and they're in lower quality schools. So a lot of times they're put in, or in high school they're pushed to vocational classes instead of into the college tracked classes. So teaching students who live in poverty. All right, so we talked about the poor effects it has on a student when they come from poverty, some possible reasons for that effect. So what do? The first is we learn about the effects of poverty on students and how they learn. Next, we set and maintain high expectations for students. We do not feel sorry for them, we do not make excuses, and we do not expect less. Maybe we support them more differently, but we do not feel sorry for them. We can sympathize, we can support. Next, we develop caring teacher-student relationships with them. We don't avoid them. We talk to them outside of class. One of the best things you can do is if you have a student, they're on the basketball team, you go to the basketball team and you tell them specifically the next time you see them what they did well. You help build their learning skills. So you're not just teaching them the content, you're teaching them how to learn. So how do you organize your materials? How do you put them in a folder when you get an assignment graded back? Things that we wouldn't assume, or we would assume a lot of students know. Students that come from poverty, sometimes we have to actually physically teach them how to do that. How do you give your attention, for 30 minutes in a row? Those are things we should teach to students. We need to pay attention to any health problems, absences, and tardies. So if we have any concerns, we can pass them along, to the people that need to know. We also need to assess what they can do great and build on that. So when we can assess their skills and their talents and build at what they're already good at, we're building confidence, we're building an understanding of the importance in school and that they can be successful there. All right, so today we just barely kind of skimmed over one part of this really amazing chapter of the textbook. So you're also going to talk about, or you're going to read about, the diversity we have with our students, race and ethnicity. You're going to read about stereotype threat, what that means for us as teachers. You're going to read a whole section on gender differences And how does education function for males versus females? What does research show us about how teachers interact with students based on gender? And then there's going to be a lot of great information about multicultural education, which I could drown on about for about 8 more 20-minute videos, but I won't. So really dive in there, get to know the content. There's a lot of really great keywords you could add to your course glossary if you still need to compile that list of 10 additional words that you're getting. And I will also have another video to walk you through the homework assignment. So make sure you watch that. It'll walk you through how to look up the building report card. But what does the textbook, regardless of what type of diversity it's referencing, what are the lessons in that chapter and in that content for us? Is that we have to teach every student in our classroom. We're teaching him or her for their individual needs as much as possible. And to do that, we have to know ourselves, to know our identity, our background, and our values. Knowing our own cultural and how we interact with others is key. And we have to know our students, the legacies they bring, because we're going to have to work with those students and their parents inside and outside of school to make the best impact we can for every student. We have to respect our students, no matter whether we agree or disagree with the culture they bring to school. We respect them where they come from. We accept their strengths. We accept their limitations, and we always build their self-images by respecting their culture. That's one of the key tenets of multicultural education. We teach your students with a strong emphasis on academics. So we're going to be aware how hidden biases creep in. Our own. We are humans. Teachers are humans. We hold high expectations and provide care and support. We focus on meaning. We also instruct students directly about how to be students. How does a culture of being a student work in my classroom? That's what I'm teaching my students, no matter what culture they have outside of my classroom. All right, hope you have a great week and talk to you soon.